I'm delighted to have you,
Thanks for
Roland,
inviting me.
along today. I've known Roland for quite a few years.
At least 5 years, I would
At least
think.
5 years.
At least 5 years, most probably a bit more than that, yeah.
I think it's a lot more than that.
That's 7.
As we get older, our memories fade. But I first knew you, Roland, because you were a word man, a book man.
Well, you saw me at Springwood, yeah.
Yes.
You were coming back from Canberra from your course.
And I got to know Roland through his interest in books and writing and literature. I had no idea he was an artist, but since I've met him and known him, I've watched this unfolding of this magnificent arts practice that we see quite frequently in galleries around, Braemar and Gallery 188.
Braemar with Victor and Sharon at 188 and
Yes.
out at Dargan at Gallery H.
Yes.
There's a new gallery that opened up last
That's
year.
right,
Yeah,
yes.
Rick Topolnitsky, yeah.
Yeah, so look, quite a few people here will know your work. So they'll be bringing some of your imagery, and we've got 2 beautiful pieces of your work.
Yeah, and there's a few smaller ones there, and I've got cards and things there as well, so on the table, so they'll have a look at later on.
Yes.
All right, yeah.
Yeah, so
Hey, Roland, we need you to shout louder.
Yeah, I will, okay.
we both speak up. So Roland, when I realised you were an artist, I became very curious about your artwork and the way you represented the natural world. And it seemed to me like you were somebody who really engaged in a very intuitive but thoughtful and relational way with the natural world. Would you like to sort of say how your relationship with the natural world and your art practice?
In essence, I'm just a landscape painter. I really don't do anything else. And I've sort of, on purpose, sort of at one stage realised I just can't do everything. And then you sort of do part-time jobs, and I had to sort of somehow narrow things down. I wasn't interested in portraiture. I did, however, like life drawing, which has sort of come through into the landscape anyway, because there's a relational connection there. But for me, it was always a love of landscape. Even as a kid, we went out to the bush quite often, and we used to camp and so on. So that was that connection for me. When I was doing technical college, I did a lot of the things that everyone does. You do your still lifes and your life drawing and stuff, but it wasn't till after I finished, then travelled a bit and then came back to Australia, that I sort of fell in love more and more with landscape and landscape painting. But it's always been more of a connection of my love of going outdoors and being outdoors and getting inspiration really from the landscape and just connecting to it. And then coming to the mountains, which is almost 25 years, has changed that dynamic even more so, just because of where we live. And things are right there at your doorstep, as you saw where I live.
Yes.
That you just look out the window, you don't necessarily have to travel very far.
Yes.
So landscape is really what I do.
Yes.
I'm not really interested in doing anything else, but it's more how I connect.
So
with
that
places.
has captured, the landscape has captured your imagination. That's your main interest.
Yeah, because I think it's, as artists, and there's going to be a lot here obviously, it's because we use our eyes, and it's whatever sort of filters through there that sort of grabs us. But then a lot of other things have sort of influenced my interest in what I read, people that I've met over the years, poetry, other people that write, and more so in the last few years, I suppose, looking at environmental issues and meeting people that actually work as academics in those areas, that you start to become more aware that there's actually more going on, and sort of a sense of urgency of why I think it's important that people actually connect with landscape.
I'm really curious about that because as I've got to know you, I'm very aware of connections that you have, people that you know and people that you actually seem deeply involved with, who are either literary people or conservation or environment people. So I'm really curious about how that sort of, how's that has evolved for you in terms of that connection that you make with people and how that shapes. You talk about urgency. How has that shaped what you do?
Look, I used to think, what's the point actually really of visual arts? And there was maybe a period where I'd stopped painting for about a year. I was living in a certain house that this lady over here lives in now, and I stopped for about a year. And I thought, look, people go to the movies and they go to sports and they do this and that. And what can actually visual arts really do? It's an old form of practice, and even more so now with people using iPads, and everyone thinks they're a photographer because they own a smartphone. And I just couldn't really make sense on how, what's the point of actually doing a landscape? I mean, I was influenced by landscape painters like Van Gogh, who is in essence a painter of the spirit of place. People like Fred Williams, Margaret Preston, but I also had sort of an amateur's interest in Aboriginal rock art, which was something that used to come in because I've travelled throughout sort of Australia. And that sort of became a thing for me because I was always interested in reading anthropology and archaeology on the side. So that was that sort of connection. So then I met people, and it all really happened, according to Joseph Campbell, who says if you follow your bliss, it puts you on a track that you've always meant to be on. And people who actually share in your bliss will actually overlap and intersect in your life. And when I was about 26, I thought, well, let's see if this actually works. And so I travelled and backpacked into the Northern Territory and got interested certainly in indigenous culture. And as I said the other week when we were chatting, I got to Alice Springs, so we're talking 30 years ago. And I just thought, this is another country. Alice it's been tidied up a bit more since the Olympics because they sort of wanted to clear the blackfellas out in a sense, and that didn't just apply to Sydney, that applied to other places. But just seeing Aboriginals living in the Todd River, and you'd go into shops and kids were shoplifting and all that sort of type of thing, and then you'd go out at night and somebody'd be thrown in the back of a paddy wagon. It was your senses are accosted because you do think, well, I don't experience any of this in my daily life, and yet this is part of Australia. So I sort of came back, and for a few years, and actually really considered to stop painting and actually go on to do anthropology. And I was actually made inquiries at Macquarie University to seriously look at it. But then, there's someone I knew that worked with Aboriginal people said, well, you're not going to learn about Aboriginal people by doing field work and being an academic. And so I sort of took the painting up again, and at some point then decided to move to the Blue Mountains. And at that stage, 25 years ago, there weren't a lot of galleries here. I mean, it's the best we've ever had it in the last 2 or 3 years since David's moved in down there, the Peraltas and so on. There's actually been a real shift. I mean, it actually is funny that it's taken that long for it to become the city of the arts. John Ellison coined the term, and it just really was almost non-existent really for visual artists. So I started just meeting people, and it was follow your bliss, and I ended up coming here. I only knew one person, and ended up finding other people who knew people that I knew, and then eventually I met people like Di Johnson, who did the Gully Claim, who ended up becoming a very dear and close friend, one of the few people I would allow into the studio if I was working on anything, because not everyone gets in there. So, just so you know. Because when he came over a week ago, so... and talking to people, and they, here's somebody that was working in that field that was really interested in what I was doing and saw that what I was doing was important. So, and I was living from up, as you know, up near the gully. And so it starts to sort of, you form a different connection with a place, because as I sort of said in the US, it was a case of looking around and saying, where are the Indians? Well, it was like that 25 years ago. Where are the Aborigines? Yeah. And the Gundungurra sort of went, that were here, sort of really went on the down low, because they had children taken away from them at the gully as well. And so they sort of learned to be quiet. So until that sort of happened and that claim came through, then you started getting Aboriginal voices appearing in the community. So that was a sort of a thing. And then I met people like Mark Tredenick, the writer and poet who wrote The Blue Plateau. And then we connected. He was interested in what I was doing. And then really via him, about 8 or 9 years ago, I got invited down to attend a symposium at Macquarie University as a visual artist. And I haven't got an academic background at all, but it came through that, through a friend of his, Deborah Bird Rose, who sadly just passed away before Christmas, a renowned cultural critic and anthropologist who did some fairly major claims throughout the territory. And here again was someone that was actually interested in what I was doing, where I just thought, well, you know, they're just pictures. You're working on land claims and doing these important things. You know, somebody else is producing collections of poetry and so on. What's okay? And then I went to a lecture down there by an academic from the US who now works on animal extinction. So that was 2009. And that was a big change for me because it was the first time that I'd heard the word Anthropocene used at all. Yep. And so he was talking about this major age of extinction and the rate of animal extinction that we have throughout the world. And what was humbling is that Jim also pointed out that we're not immune to actually becoming extinct on the planet. That we have this arrogance that we're actually at the top of the pecking order and that we will actually solve what's going on. And so people that I've talked to in academic fields, in some sense it's almost too late. It's all happening now. The ball's sort of rolling with climate change and whatever. And in many cases we're not really going to be able to pull back, you know, because governments basically aren't doing anything. So all these people were interested in my art. And then I started seeing that actually it can also be a very subtle force for change.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really interesting because I think as artists we tend to work often in isolation and to lose a sense of that what we're doing has any value. And you know, you put your work out there and you might sell a few works at an exhibition or something, but you sort of wonder, well, is this having any impact? So you were getting actually feedback from people around you who were involved in the same sort of thinking things that you were,
in essence,
and giving you affirmation that your artwork actually has a place in this whole kind of conversation. So tell me more about that.
Well, because I think that applies to...
The podcast will be on the Talking Art website, which is talkingart.com.au. So you'll be able to go and have a look and hear the conversation with Roland again, and also look at some of the other podcasts that we've got up on the website. So thank you.
Thank you.